Have you ever wondered why some women live alone? No boyfriend, no partner, not even seeming like they're looking for one. The answer isn't loneliness, lack of options, or heartbreak. It lies in something more uncomfortable, more unsettling, something that deconstructs everything we were taught about a woman's role. Because when a woman chooses to be alone, she isn't getting lost. She's finding herself. And that kind of self-discovery doesn't come with applause, likes, or company. It comes with silence, strength, and a kind of freedom most people still don't understand. No, she's not lonely. She's selective. She's not cold. She just got tired of burning for people who never wanted to feel the warmth. There's something profoundly threatening about a woman who doesn't need a relationship to feel whole, because that shatters the logic of control, dismantles the myth of emotional dependency, and reveals a brutal truth. Most men don't know what to do with a woman who doesn't need saving, and most women are still learning to recognize themselves in that silent, yet deafening mirror of power. Carl Jung once said that everything we deny in ourselves becomes part of our shadow, and many of these single women are actually a reflection of the collective shadow. They are what many dream of becoming, but few have the courage to embody. They don't scream for love. They whisper their choices. They don't put themselves on display to attract attention. They retreat to preserve themselves. They're less interested in charming princes and more in their own peace. And that makes people uncomfortable, because while the world demands urgency to be with someone, these women have discovered the power of being with themselves. The woman who lives alone without a boyfriend isn't lost. She's operating on a different level, a level where nothing is begged for. It's chosen, where approval isn't needed. Presence is enough. And maybe that's why she sparks so much criticism, so much judgment, so many attempts to label or explain her. But what many still don't understand is that behind her apparent absence is a presence that fills, that transcends, that challenges the emotional status quo. She doesn't want just any kind of love. She wants something that doesn't shrink her. And until that comes along, she stands strong, whole, complete. Maybe you don't get it right now. Maybe you think it's exaggeration, pride, or emotional damage in disguise. But deep down, way deep down, there's a question inside you, a quiet one that pulses even when you try to ignore it. What if that silent path is actually the only one that leads to the most important kind of love, the one that starts with you? The silence that surrounds a woman who lives alone is not emptiness. It's a sanctuary. And those who don't understand the value of that space often call her cold, distant, or even arrogant. But what few people see is that she didn't build that fortress to shut the world out. She built it to not lose herself. Carl Jung also said that everything we don't face in ourselves, we end up projecting onto others, and maybe that's why so many women still confuse solitude with absence, when in reality, it can be the fertile ground for self-discovery. While most people look to fill themselves through external connections, this woman turned her gaze inward, and there, in the vastness of her own unconscious, she faced the ghosts she avoided for years, childhood wounds unspoken, abandonments, attachments disguised as love. Her decision to be alone didn't come from an open wound, but from a scar that finally healed. She didn't stop believing in love. She just stopped accepting what others called love when it only made her feel smaller. This woman knows chaos. She's loved until she lost herself. She's given too much. She's begged for crumbs that never should have been offered in the first place. But at some point she woke up, and that awakening wasn't sudden. It was a series of disappointments that stopped hurting and started teaching. What you see now isn't coldness. It's emotional maturity. And maturity is scary, because it demands presence, depth, and truth. She doesn't want just any company. She wants reciprocity. She's no longer attracted to promises, but to real presence. So maybe that's why she seems unreachable to many, because she doesn't want to be saved. She wants to be seen. And that takes more than charm or sweet words. It takes courage to dive into the depths where few dare to go. And that's where many give up, not because she's difficult, but because she's whole, And when a woman becomes whole, she awakens two extremes in the world: admiration and fear. Admiration from those who are also seeking that wholeness. Fear from those who still live in halves, waiting for someone else to make them feel complete. She doesn't want to complete anyone, she wants to overflow alongside someone who has also found themselves. Until then, she remains alone, not by fate's whim, but out of loyalty to her own soul. This woman isn't hiding, she's protecting herself. There's a vast difference between isolating and preserving oneself. But the world doesn't easily accept a woman like this. A world that still preaches happily ever after, only exists in pairs. A world that distrusts those without a partner, as if that were a sign of failure. Carl Jung once said that where convention rules, there's little room for authenticity. And this woman doesn't live by convention, she lives by essence. She hears phrases like, "You're too picky. You should be more open. Nobody's perfect." And she smiles, a calm, steady, almost ironic smile, because she knows what many call picky is simply the bare minimum. It took her decades to realize she deserves. She's not looking for perfection. She's looking for someone mature enough to love without destroying someone who's done the inner work she has already faced. And let's be honest, that's not something you find on just any street corner. The discomfort she causes isn't in what she says, it's in what she represents. She's living proof that it's possible to be happy without depending on anyone else, and that tears masks off men who feed on female insecurity feel threatened. Women still trapped in the need for approval feel judged. But she isn't here to confront anyone, she's just being. And the authenticity of someone who has freed herself is by itself a brutal mirror to those still living in chains. This woman isn't in a hurry. She doesn't need to rush things to please anyone. She respects her own pace. And for that, she stirs a silent fury in a society that wants everything. Now she wants depth. While the world chases distractions, she wants presence. While the world offers only shallow availability, she longs for soul-level bonds. While everyone else is trying to look interesting on the next Instagram story, and when she says no, it's not a game, it's truth. When she walks away, it's not drama, it's self-defense. When she chooses to stay home instead of going out with someone empty, it's not arrogance, it's clarity. And that clarity earned through pain. And surrender is her greatest revolution, because she doesn't live to please, she lives to be. And that simple act, being, is what makes her so dangerous to the system. Perhaps what unsettles people most about this woman isn't her solitude, it's the peace she's found within herself. Carl Jung taught that those who look outward dream, but those who look inward awaken. And it was precisely that inner journey that she took. It wasn't easy. It was a grueling process of stripping off masks, facing the ghosts of emotional dependency, and rebuilding herself piece by piece. She no longer defines herself through the eyes of others. She sees the tigduplicate in herself through her own eyes. And that changes everything. How many times have you wondered if being alone is failure or freedom? How many times have you felt the need to justify yourself for not having someone by your side? This woman has felt that too. She once thought there was something wrong with her for being alone in a world that idolizes couples, even unhappy ones. But one day she understood, it's better to be alone than to be invisible in a relationship. And that day she made a pact with herself. Never again would she accept less than what she truly deserves. Her path is not a straight line. There are days of doubt, moments of nostalgia, nights of deep silence, but there's also a strength that grows with each decision made in awareness. She learned that true love doesn't cage, doesn't consume, doesn't manipulate. The love she wants is the kind that liberates, that adds, that supports without suffocating. And until that love arrives, she chooses to keep growing on her own, not out of pride, but out of integrity. This woman is the living embodiment of Jung's individuation. She shattered, faced her shadow, descended into the unconscious, and returned more whole than ever. And now that she recognizes herself, she refuses to be half of anything again. She doesn't want someone to complete her. She wants someone to share that awareness with. That's intimidating, because it demands emotional responsibility, and sadly, few are willing to love responsibly most. Still love out of lack, out of possession, out of fear. And if she walks alone today, it's because every step echoes with learning. Every no she gives is an act of self-respect. Every absence she imposes is a reminder that love should never be begged, for she no longer needs to prove anything to beg anyone. And that certainty, born from the deepest part of her soul, transforms everything around her. Because a woman who has rediscovered herself becomes dangerous, not because of her weapons, but because of her clarity. The woman who lives alone without a boyfriend is not the same woman who once begged to be loved. Something inside her broke, and it was precisely that break that set her free. Because sometimes only in collapse does the soul find its new form. Carl Jung used to say that the tree that grows to heaven must also have roots that reach down to hell. And that's exactly what she lived. Through, she descended into the hell of her own story, faced ancestral fears, inherited pain traumas that weren't just hers, but those of all the women who came before her. She broke cycles. She said no to relationships that repeated the same toxic script. She learned that it wasn't her job to heal anyone, save anyone, accept crumbs out of fear of being alone. And when she stopped accepting less, the world tried to convince her she was wrong, but she stood her ground first with uncertainty, then with awareness, and finally with invulnerability. Because someone who has lived in their own abyss no longer fears absence. She learns to nourish herself with silence, to warm herself with her own presence. She's not unreachable. She simply no longer allows herself to be invaded. There's a world of difference between opening your heart and letting yourself be torn apart. She opens, yes, but only for those who come in truth, not with rehearsed speeches or empty promises. She's seen enough to tell the difference between presence and performance. Her intuition has become sharp. Her energy is a filter. She can sense from afar what lacks depth, and she doesn't hesitate to walk away. Her transformation isn't superficial. It's archetypal, as if she's tapped into an ancient wisdom, an old memory that women weren't born to serve, but to express, not to be shaped, but to overflow. And in accessing that memory, something awakened in her, a wild woman, intuitive, emotionally sovereign, a woman who, though alone, is far from lost. She's in communion with something greater, with her own destiny. And no matter how much they try to reduce her with labels, cold, difficult, distant, nothing sticks. Because she no longer lives to fit in, she lives to expand. She no longer fights for attention, she radiates presence. She's no longer waiting to be chosen, she does the choosing. And that reversal of logic confuses those who still try to control the feminine. But she's no longer there. She's already crossed the threshold, and on the other side, she discovered that the real relationship begins only after you've loved yourself enough to not need anyone. There's something sacred about the way she walks through the world. She doesn't need applause or public validation. Her confidence is quiet, and it's in that silence that her true strength lives. Carl Jung said that everything we face within eventually becomes our destiny. And perhaps that's why this woman, in choosing herself again and again, has become the author of a destiny that few can understand, but many secretly envy. She no longer tries to fill voids with promises or convince anyone that she deserves love. She doesn't beg for space in anyone's life, because she's learned that presence should never be begged for. It should be invited. And when the invitation doesn't come from truth, she simply declines. She doesn't react with anger or bitterness. She steps right away with the dignity of someone who's gotten lost too many times to let the same wound happen again. What few people understand is that this woman still longs for love. She still wants to be held, touched, chosen. But she wants it without losing herself, because she's spent too long trying to squeeze into molds too small for the soul she carries now. She only offers herself where there's room to be whole, and that requires a level of maturity that goes far beyond romance. It requires awareness. It requires having faced one's own shadow and still choosing to love. She's not looking for fairy tales. She's looking for a soul alliance. A connection where there's no domination or submission, where both can grow beside each other without dimming their colors, silencing their pain, or shrinking their dreams. And if that seems too much for some, so be it, because she'd rather wait than survive on emotional crumbs. And to many that sounds like arrogance, but it's really just self-love in its purest form. We are witnessing a new archetype of woman. A woman who has walked away from the superficial and dived into the depths, who got tired of being merely desired and chose to be respected, who chose to be alone, not because she gave up on love, but because she began to understand that real love never demands self-denial. And when a woman understands that her whole world begins to change, she doesn't need to raise her voice to be heard. Her presence speaks before any words. Wherever she goes, the energy shifts, like something in the room realigns subtly but unmistakably. This isn't mysticism. It's energy. It's the weight of someone who has already faced the most brutal inner wars and chose to return in peace, not because she conquered all her fears, but because she learned to live with them without being defeated. Carl Jung would say she found wholeness not by eliminating opposites, but by integrating them. This woman doesn't reject love. She simply learned not to submit to unbalanced relationships where one must dim so the other can shine. She longs to love, but in a love where her essence doesn't need to be edited. A love where she can be both shadow and light, laughter and tears, silence and storm, because she realized that those who only love the pretty parts haven't yet learned what love truly is. And those who demand constant sweetness still don't understand the beauty of bitterness, so necessary for growth that she's too whole to settle for halves, too free to accept prisons disguised as care, too sensitive to endure shallow bonds, and at the same time strong enough to keep choosing this path even when it hurts, even when it's lonely, even when it's misunderstood. That is the journey of an awakened soul, giving up instant validation in exchange for deeper truth. Deep down, the world fears women like her, women who don't need women, who don't bow women, who refuse to be molded because they challenge invisible structures, question old patterns, and break silent emotional contracts that once said a woman only has worth if she is with someone. And when she breaks those contracts, when she rewrites her own narrative, she inspires others, and that for the system is dangerously revolutionary. So she continues, sometimes with tears in her eyes, sometimes with her chest held high, but always with her feet firmly on the ground, because now she knows she's not alone. She's with herself. And after everything she's lived through, that is more than enough. The love that comes after that won't be salvation. It will to be celebration. It won't come to fill her. It will come to overflow. When a woman chooses to walk alone, the world rushes to convince her she's making a mistake. But deep down, she feels something aligning within her. It's not pride or rebellion. It's a rare kind of wisdom that can only be born in silence. The same wisdom Jung called individuation, the process of becoming fully who you are, without masks, without compromise. And when that happens, nothing outside her has more power than the truth that pulses inside her chest. That truth doesn't need to shout, it can show itself in the way she quietly closes a door, without resentment in how she withdraws, when the environment no longer nourishes her, in the way she smiles in peace, even with no one by her side, because she discovered that being alone is not a punishment. It's a vow of loyalty to her own soul, and the soul of an awakened woman does not submit, does not dim, does not beg. It simply is, and that is enough. The world will keep trying to tell her she's missing something. It will keep offering distractions, plastic princes, love made for display, but she's already seen behind the curtain. She's already understood. It's not about finding someone. It's about never losing yourself again. And when that realization blooms, everything changes. Desire becomes discernment. Lack becomes choice. Waiting becomes a path. And what once hurt now teaches. What once bound now sets free. You can feel it deep inside, that stirring, that spark. Maybe it's a memory, an old wound, a nostalgia that never made sense. Maybe it's the image of a woman you once knew, or the woman you've become. In either case, something within you is asking to be seen more clearly, something that no longer fits in old molds, something that if you let, it could completely transform how you relate to love to others, and most importantly, to yourself. That woman who lives alone is more than just someone who doesn't fit the mold. She is a living symbol of emotional freedom, a reminder that it's possible to rebuild without hurry, without fear, and without needing to prove anything to anyone. She doesn't walk ahead of anyone, but she doesn't follow either. She carves her own path, unique, enviable, and along that journey she lights little fires for others who are waking up too. If something inside you was touched by this story, maybe it's because deep down, you too are ready for a new kind of love. A love that begins with reconciliation with yourself. A love that feeds on silence, presence, and truth. A love that can't be negotiated, begged for, or disguised. And if that love hasn't come, yet maybe it's because you first needed to become the woman who no longer accepts less than she deserves. And if this message found you at the right moment, or awakened someone you forgot was living inside you, then I invite you not to keep it to yourself. Share this video with other women who need to remember their own strength. Like it, comment, and subscribe to this channel. Not out of impulse, but out of choice. Because when something touches the soul, the least we can do is let it keep resonating within us and through us. Don't forget to subscribe. The Wisdom Archive. Thank you all.